Hi, welcome to Big Homeopathy. I'm your host, Big Homeopath, Sarah Thompson. Like I talked about last week, I'm going to focus this week on research and resources. Next week, go back to personal transformation and kind of toggle back and forth between those two. So this week, I want to talk about resources. And as homeopaths, we know we are always going back to the breadth and depth of the earliest work in homeopathy. And it's still relevant. And I love the way I am reading the latest book from Jeremy Sher and then going back to the chronic diseases and that the 12 remedy reactions and the appropriate response in chapter 35 of Kent's lectures on philosophy, which were published in 1900, are still very relevant today. But my bookshelf situation, since I started studying homeopathy in my little house, is out of control. It's the picture of sulfur, stacks of vermeulen and Vithucus on the bedside table, and Burnett and Jansen and Klein falling over on the floor. And so I'm really excited that I got this email a couple of weeks ago from hpathy.com that they were putting their library at a separate website, homeopathybooks.in, and it's a searchable database of all these public domain resources. It's just a gold mine. And they're also asking for copyrighted material for professionals that are willing to share that. And I think that's great. I know there's nothing like a physical book, and just as with music and art, being able to see the electronic versions of these things gets me more excited about buying the hard copies. So I would love to see more of this stuff available. And then also in PDF so that I could take it on an e-reader, because I travel back and forth between my home and my office. And I would love to be able to port things in that way. So I'm putting that out to the universe that I would love to see that. And even though I'm talking about technology, I think that homeopaths sometimes have a reputation for being a little bit technology averse. But I think our profession has done a really good job of taking advantage of what the internet allows us to do in terms of bridging geographical gaps. And I love the ability to go study under a homeopath in person and then to take a course online with some of the contemporary giants in the field. And because I have been getting a lot of inquiries about vaccine-related issues due to what's going on politically right now, and because I have children in my practice who suffered adverse reactions and never recovered after vaccination, I sought out Dr. Isaac Golden, because he is a homeopath in Australia who is a pioneer in the field of homeoprophylaxis, HP, and in working with vaccine-damaged children. And he has online courses and books and mentorship and articles, and we're going to talk about one of his research papers today. And he offers the simple deduction that when you give a remedy that's made from a vaccine and you see a relief of symptoms that came on after vaccination, it's reasonable to conclude that there's a relationship between those symptoms and the vaccine. But vaccines were developed to solve a very real problem, which is that certain epidemic diseases in certain populations can be devastating. And that is a laudable thing to consider. And that's where homeoprophylaxis can come in. Now, homeoprophylaxis is not a new idea. James Compton Burnett first used the term in a paper he published, I think 1897, about thuja and vaccinosis, which has led to a sometimes erroneous assumption that thuja is the remedy to think of whenever there is vaccinosis. But he was working with smallpox vaccine, and that's what he was focused on. And if it's a situation of smallpox vaccination or psychotic miasm, that's one to consider. But I've had success with Mesarium, and there are others. You analyze a vaccine case just like any other, and you look at the symptoms. And Dr. Isaac has done a lot of amazing work with building out the materia medica for the vaccine remedies. Hahnemann talked about using belladonna prophylactically with scarlet fever in 1798. So there's precedent even in Hahnemann's work for this idea of using remedies prophylactically. And in this paper, which is called, let me find the name of it for you, Large-scale homeoprophylaxis, results of brief and long-term interventions. Dr. Isaac focuses on, initially he was looking at Cuba, India, and Brazil. This update of the earlier research is really focused on India. In the treatment or the prophylaxis against Japanese encephalitis and acute encephalitic syndrome in this one region of India. This paper is not available in the public domain. I had to request it. And that is something that I wanted to put out there and find out what you guys think about, because I'm not a writer of research papers. And I find that I'm frustrated when I'm doing this work and how often I come up against a paywall and I can't get the paper. And I think that, and I'm all for that. I'm all for selling one's goods and services. I do think that having as much credible positive research out as available to even the most casual researcher, casual reader, is really helpful to our field. I mean, I know how information travels. Certainly we've seen in the vaccine debate how information travels in social media. People are not taking the time to go to the library to request papers. And I wonder, as those of you that do write research, what are the pros and cons of self-publishing your research and making some of it available in the public domain so that it could be accessed in that way? I wonder what are the issues around that. So anyhow, in this particular situation, the HP was both nosodes made from the disease and the genus Epidemicus remedies. And it was not randomized. There is some controls in certain situations, but this is something that is used in these emergent crisis situations where there just isn't time to do an academic study. People need these remedies when this crisis hits. I mean, there are 1.3 million babies born annually in this region of this study. And when there's a disease crisis, clinical workers need to be able to act, and the benign nature of homeopathy is such that you don't need the safety studies in order to be able to use it. And the results are really incredible. I'm going to pop them up on the screen for you here. I did get permission to publish this graph. And overall in the paper, the results were between 63.9% and 99.96% effectiveness with a weighted average of 89.45% effectiveness. But you can see here that from 1995 to 1999, there were 758 reported incidents and 171 reported average deaths. And during the period of the HP intervention, incidence and death declined dramatically. They stopped the program after they'd had 5 years of zero death. There is a spike in 2003, and Dr. Isaac isn't sure why. It's possible that Reye's syndrome was misdiagnosed as either Japanese encephalitis or AES because they look similar, and that often happens in clinical crisis settings when there is a similar symptom pattern, that you'll get a diagnosis without a test because they're trying to move forward and get the resources to help these people. But then you do see an increase in incidence again once they stopped the program. So again, with that number, 1.3 million babies born annually, that's not surprising, but it is good to see that the rates of death are still very low. And you know, for all the people that are concerned about the measles situation right now, I think rather than trying to force other people to take a drug that, or to give their children a drug that they're concerned about the safety and efficacy of, think about these other solutions. There are ways that we can work together to find solutions for vulnerable populations that don't involve force. And the numbers aren't in this particular study, but homeopathic remedies are so inexpensive. I know as a practitioner that you can obtain thousands of remedies for under $100. So somebody needs to get Bill Gates on the phone and tell him that this option is out there. And this is the kind of study that is exciting to talk about. It's not the kind of personal individual transformation that I'm dealing with in my practice. It's just not the nature of my practice. But to see the way homeopathy can improve the quality of life of so many people in such a dramatic way, in a crisis situation and in situations where children are really suffering, is just so powerful, and it's a testament to the importance of the work that people like Dr. Isaac are doing, and to the fact that homeopathy is big. It's big homeopathy, and it's going to be huge. I'll see you next week.